Imagine waking up one morning to the sky turning red. Ships, alien ships, block out the sun, and before you can even comprehend what's happening, your world is being torn apart. Your family, your home, gone. And in the midst of this devastation, there's only one question that matters: who will fight back? This is not some fairy tale or distant history. This is humanity's story. A story of vengeance, survival, and the fight for freedom. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is the shocking truth that could change everything you know about war in the stars. Smash that like button if you're ready for an adventure that will take you beyond the edge of the galaxy. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because you won't want to miss a single moment of this journey. How would you fight if your home was destroyed? Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and let's see who's brave enough to join the rebellion. Type "We Rise Together" if you're with us. The peaceful colony of Nutera had never seen a warship. For over 200 years, they lived under the quiet embrace of distant stars, building their homes, tending to their fields, teaching their children to dream of peaceful futures. They lived in the kind of innocence that only a remote colony, tucked away in the farthest corners of the galaxy, could afford. The people here thought they were invisible, that the universe had forgotten they existed. They didn't need weapons, and their defense system was the hope that nothing would ever find them in this forgotten corner of the spiral arm. But the universe, as it always does, has a cruel way of reminding the peaceful that peace is but an illusion. One day, without warning, the sky above Nutera turned red. The sun disappeared, blotted out by the shadows of dozens of massive ships, their sleek, deadly shapes cutting through the sky. The Rafar Empire, an empire known for its brutality and insatiable thirst for conquest, had arrived. The first thing the people of Nutera heard were the hums, the mechanical whirs of engines far louder than any human voice. The second was the silence, the kind of silence that comes only moments before destruction. The ships descended like vultures, their sharp metal edges gleaming ominously. No alarms, no time to gather their families or flee. The invaders were already here, and they were too late to react. The beams from the alien ships tore into the planet's surface. Buildings crumbled under the intensity of the blasts. The sky rained fire as power stations exploded in clouds of smoke and debris. There was no warning, no mercy. Just a violent force that didn't care to negotiate or understand. The Rafar Empire had seen this quiet, unsuspecting colony on a deep space scan and had deemed it unworthy of protection. What was the use of a peaceful world, after all? Their empire thrived on destruction, and Nutera, like many other forgotten places, was nothing more than an opportunity to expand their reach. The first wave of soldiers landed, armored, relentless, and cold. They marched through the streets, killing everyone in their path with robotic efficiency. The people tried to resist, but they had no weapons, no defenses. The shock of the attack was enough to shatter any last remnants of hope. The colony had never prepared for war, and now, as their homes burned, they realized that peace had never been their ally. In the chaos, the invaders didn't notice her, the lone survivor, hidden deep beneath the ruins of a collapsed building. Maya Jennings, a young technician, had witnessed the death of her friends and family in an instant. Her world was ending, but she refused to die in vain. With the last of her strength, she crawled to an emergency pod, activated it, and sent her final message. A recording, desperate, filled with blood, smoke, and the frantic pulse of a heart racing against time. They came. We're dying. Tell Earth. Please. And with that, her small pod shot out into the void, carrying with it a plea for help that echoed through the empty silence of space. It was a plea that would cross light years, through the vast expanse, until it finally reached Earth Defense Command, buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, 9 days later. The people at Earth's command center had long stopped receiving distress signals. The galaxy had been at peace for decades, and humanity had become complacent, thinking they had put the horrors of war behind them. When the alarm went off, the personnel thought it was a mistake, just another glitch. But then they watched the video, a recording of Nutera burning, of innocent lives being torn apart, and they knew it wasn't a mistake. It was real. The footage of burning cities, the faces of the dead, and the frantic last words of Maya Jennings played like a cursed lullaby. No one said a word in that moment. The faces on the command center's monitors were hard, unblinking, but their hearts pounded with something they hadn't felt in years: rage. Above Earth, far in the depths of space, something began to move. Not ships, not fighters, but war machines, ancient, colossal, and forgotten. These were the kind of machines that hadn't been used since the galaxy had known peace. Their systems were old, their weapons long dormant. But now, they were waking up. In the war room, General Elias War, who hadn't spoken publicly in 30 years, stepped forward. His face was withered, lined with years of silence and compromise. He looked at the screen, then looked at the room full of military leaders. There was no hesitation in his voice, just a cold, calculated resolve. Activate protocol judgment. Unleash the fleet. At first, it seemed like nothing had changed. But soon, the massive shipyards that dotted Mars, Titan, Europa, and even the moons of Saturn began to hum with life. Massive warships, once thought to be relics of a forgotten age, began to rise from their cradles, their engines roaring to life with a sound that could have shaken the stars themselves. One ship after another, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant suns, they were activated, the ships of vengeance. Ships filled with weapons so deadly that their existence had been classified as a last resort. These ships had never been used because the weapons on board were too powerful. But the Rafar Empire had made a mistake. They thought humanity would stay silent. They thought humans were weak, content to stay in their peaceful colonies, far from the conflict of the galaxy. They had miscalculated. The fleet began to move. A sea of iron and fire, ready to respond. Not to rescue, but to strike back. The Rafar had thought it was just a small, forgotten colony. They were wrong. They had awoken something they could never hope to control. And as humanity's fleet left the safety of Earth's orbit, headed for the Rafar Empire's heart, General Elias War's voice echoed one last command. Prepare for war. And this time, we fight to win. The stars were no longer quiet. The galaxy would soon learn, humanity remembers, and it never forgets. The command center of Earth's defense was eerily silent as the signal from Nuterra blared across the screens. For decades, the base had sat dormant, its corridors quiet, the weapons long since coated with dust. The war was over, they thought, at least, that was the lie they told themselves. But the moment the images from Nuterra flooded the room, the truth shattered the illusion. Burning buildings, the screams of children, the destruction of an innocent world, the footage had been too much to ignore. The message was clear: humanity had been attacked, and the galaxy would now feel the consequences. General Elias War stood before the screens, his weathered face a mask of hardened resolve. It had been decades since he'd seen a battlefield, and the years had taken their toll. His bones ached, but the fire in his eyes never dimmed. He knew this moment was coming, he just hadn't expected it to arrive on the backs of so many dead. He didn't speak at first. There were no comforting words, no hollow reassurances. The entire room was still, as if even the air held its breath. Then, without hesitation, Elias War stepped forward and activated the command. His fingers moved over the console, unlocking the protocol that had been sealed away for centuries, protocol judgment. A low hum reverberated through the base. The once dead monitors flickered to life, flashing warnings and status updates from across Earth's space network. The Earth Defense Fleet was awake. And this was no ordinary fleet. These ships, these titans of war, had been dormant for longer than anyone alive could remember. They were relics from a forgotten age, hidden away in shipyards spread across Mars, Europa, and the moons of Saturn. These were not ships built for trade, peace, or exploration. They were the weapons of last resort, constructed with ancient technology too powerful for any human to fully comprehend. They were designed for vengeance, for extermination. And now, their time had come. Elias War's voice cut through the silence of the room. Unleash the fleet. On Mars, massive shipyards began to hum, their dormant systems awakening from slumber. Worker drones that had long been idle were suddenly put to work, massive machines rising from the cradles that had held them for centuries. One by one, warships that looked as though they belonged to an ancient empire began to break free of their constraints. Their steel hulls gleamed like polished metal, casting sharp shadows across the barren Martian surface. These ships were no longer forgotten, they were being called to life. The fleet was rising. Europa's shipyards were no different. Beneath the ice-covered surface, vast factories that had lain dormant for centuries sprang to life, their machinery groaning as it powered up. Massive ships, ancient yet fearsome, began to take form. Some were like floating citadels, their guns mounted in rows, capable of devastating entire fleets with a single volley. Others were sleek, fast, built for surgical strikes that could obliterate anything in their path. Together, they formed a fleet unlike any the galaxy had seen in millennia. Titan, the largest warship humanity had ever built, lurked beneath the icy moons of Saturn, hidden in an asteroid field. Its hull was pockmarked with the scars of age, but it was far from obsolete. It was the ship of ships, massive, powerful, and terrifying. As it awoke, its AI began to pulse with life, reconnecting the forgotten systems that had been dormant for so long. Titan was not just a ship, it was a living weapon, capable of annihilating entire civilizations. And now, it had been called back to serve its true purpose. Humanity was no longer hiding. No longer at peace. The galaxy had made a fatal mistake. The Rafar Empire had assumed that humans were weak, that they would cower in silence. But they had underestimated the fierce will of humanity. The fleet was awake, and it would respond with fury. As the massive warships began to rise from their cradles and take to the stars, the energy in Earth's command center shifted. The air was thick with tension, but it was a different kind of tension now, a tension that smelled like steel and fire. Earth had not fought a war in centuries, but they had not forgotten how to fight. The generals, once hesitant, now moved with purpose, their faces set with grim determination. Elias War stood before the screens, watching as the fleet came together. His hands gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white. There was no fear in his eyes, only the cold certainty of a man who had seen war and understood its price. He knew what this would cost. And he knew that there was no turning back. The warships, sleek and powerful, formed up, each one flying under the banner of Earth, but their purpose was not just to defend, it was to avenge. The message was clear to anyone who could hear it: the galaxy had awoken something it could not control. The Rafar Empire had thought it was just another weak human colony, but they had made one simple mistake. They had woken the beast. As the fleet assembled, General Elias War spoke again, his voice cold and resolute. "We will show them what happens when they attack Earth. We will show them that the galaxy is no longer silent." In the vast expanse of space, the ships began to move, their engines roaring to life. The sound was deafening, a low hum that reverberated through the empty reaches of the galaxy. The stars ahead dimmed as the fleet tore through the void, an unstoppable force of retribution, a tidal wave of fury heading straight for the heart of the Rafar Empire. But as the ships moved farther into the galaxy, Elias War couldn't shake the feeling of dread gnawing at him. The Rafar Empire had made its first mistake by attacking New Terra. But his gut told him that this might not be their only mistake. The galaxy was vast, and no matter how powerful humanity's response might be, there would always be someone, waiting in the darkness, watching from the edge. And that, in itself, was a terrifying thought. At least, that's what he told himself as he stared out into the abyss of space. Because the alternative? Well, that would be far worse than a few centuries of peace being shattered. "We're all going to die, aren't we?" Elias muttered under his breath. But then he let out a short, harsh laugh. "Well, at least we'll die knowing we tried." The laughter was bitter. The hum of anticipation filled the command center, a heavy silence hanging in the air, broken only by the occasional clink of boots on metal floors. Across the room, monitors flickered to life, showing the final preparations for the Earth fleet's launch. No one spoke, the weight of the moment was too heavy, too significant. The images from Nuterra were still fresh in everyone's minds, the burning cities, the screams of the innocents, and the haunting last words from Maya Jennings, "Tell Earth, please." That tiny message had traveled across the stars, bringing a message of destruction that Earth could no longer ignore. They were no longer the peaceful colonists. They were warriors now, united not by hope, but by fury. It had been decades since the Earth fleet had been anything more than a memory. For so long, humans had chosen to believe that their peaceful existence would remain untouched. But that illusion had shattered in the blink of an eye when Nuterra was destroyed. General Elias War stood at the head of the room, staring at the massive holoscreen in front of him. The footage from Nuterra had played one too many times. The images of human suffering, families torn apart, cities reduced to ash, it was all too much. But what shook him the most was the response from the people of Earth. It wasn't fear. It wasn't chaos. It was strength. It was as if humanity had been waiting for an excuse to wake from its slumber. The fires of vengeance burned in their hearts, and the people who had once cowered beneath a veil of peace now stood tall, ready to fight. The fleet assembled in Earth's orbit was a sight to behold. Ancient warships, each one a testament to humanity's forgotten strength, floated in the void. Their steel hulls gleamed, their engines humming with the power of centuries-old technology. Ships long thought abandoned, Titan, Vindicator, and the rest, were now brought back to life. They had been hidden away for millennia, constructed for a war that had never come. Now, the war was here, and humanity was prepared to respond in full force. Titan, the legendary warship that had been buried in the depths of space, was now the flagship of Earth's fleet. Its reactivation was a moment of significance, a turning point in human history. No longer a symbol of forgotten wars, Titan was humanity's vengeance given form. Its massive hull, scarred by time but powerful as ever, now stood at the head of the fleet. Its AI, which had been dormant for centuries, began to power up, its systems flickering to life like the awakening of a Titan from a long sleep. General Elias stepped forward, his voice steady but heavy with the burden of leadership. Unleash the fleet. As the command was given, the fleet sprang to life. Ships surged from their positions, engines roaring to life, their weapon systems online and ready for battle. Across the solar system, Earth's ships began to move, cutting through the void like an unstoppable force. Their destination was clear: the Rafar Empire, the conquerors who had dared to destroy Nuterra, would feel the wrath of humanity. In the streets of Earth's cities, the citizens watched with bated breath. The warships could be seen, their silhouettes visible against the backdrop of space. People stood in their homes, in parks, and in the streets, eyes fixed on the sky. There was no longer any doubt about what was to come. The images of Nuterra, the devastation, the loss, and the anger were seared into the minds of every human. The fleet had been unleashed, and with it, humanity's fury. But it wasn't just the military that stood ready. Everywhere, from the farms to the factories, from the research labs to the medical centers, Earth's citizens rallied to the cause. Soldiers and engineers, medics and scientists, every person, regardless of their background, came together in a show of unity. Even the elderly and the children, who had once known nothing but peace, now understood the stakes. The threat was real, and their home was at risk. Humanity had always been a species capable of great things, but it was often the horrors of war that brought out their true strength. The fleet, now fully assembled, surged forward, ready to face the enemy that had thought they could wipe out a colony without consequence. But what the Rafar Empire hadn't counted on was the determination of a species who had been pushed too far. The fleet moved through space, their engines leaving a trail of fire in their wake. The ships were not just vehicles of war, they were the physical manifestation of humanity's resolve. Each one carried the memory of Nuterra, the pain of loss, and the promise of retribution. This wasn't just a mission to defend a colony, this was humanity's response to being underestimated, to being forgotten, to being crushed under the boot of an empire that had no idea what it had awakened. As the fleet prepared to engage the enemy, the AI aboard Titan spoke, its voice cold and calculated. Targeting systems online. Ready to engage. General Elias War stood at the helm, his face hardening as he looked at the incoming coordinates. "It's time," he said, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to the fleet commander standing beside him. "Prepare for the assault. Humanity will not be silenced again." The ships moved into position, their weapon systems locked and ready. The first salvo of fire was launched, massive energy blasts that tore through space and lit up the darkness. The Rafar Empire had no idea what was coming. They had thought humanity weak, but they were about to learn the truth, the hard way. But amid the chaos of battle, General Elias couldn't help but think back to the days before the war. Before the fleet had been awakened. Before Nuterra had fallen. There was a time when he had believed in peace, and a future where humans could live without fear. But now, as he watched the ships tear through the stars, he realized that peace had always been a fragile dream. It had been shattered, and in its place, something far more dangerous had been born. As the battle raged, Elias found a moment of grim humor in the irony of it all. He had spent his entire life trying to avoid war, trying to preserve peace. And now, here he was, leading humanity's vengeance. He could almost hear the voice of his younger self, warning him about the price of peace. "Well," Elias muttered under his breath, "at least we'll have a hell of a story to tell if we survive." And with that, the fleet continued its march into the unknown, towards the enemy who had made the fatal mistake of thinking humanity had forgotten how to fight. The fleet moved like a shadow through the vastness of space, its massive warships slicing through the darkness with deadly precision. The Rafar Empire, still cloaked in arrogance and overconfidence, had no idea what was coming. They had mocked humanity's cry for vengeance, thinking Earth's response would be no more than a scattered, disorganized effort. But that was before Commander Avatran, known as the Ghost General, had taken charge. She had always been more than just a brilliant tactician. She was a force of nature, a ruthless mastermind who thrived in chaos. As the fleet hurtled toward the Rafar's core, Avatran's mind was as sharp as the weapons that would soon cut through the enemy's forces. She had lost too much, too many families, too many colonies. She would not let the Rafar Empire laugh at humanity any longer. This was personal. The ships under her command were more than just vessels. They were symbols of humanity's rage, their desire for justice after the destruction of Nuterra. And Avatran knew that once the fight began, there would be no turning back. The humans had been forced into this war. But now they were a living nightmare for the Rafar. The first volley of shots came without warning, a sudden burst of energy from the Rafar fleet, aimed straight for the Titan. The massive warship's shields flared to life, a golden wall of energy absorbing the full brunt of the attack. The Rafar ships had thought it would be an easy strike. How could this ancient, dormant ship withstand their power? But they had underestimated humanity's ingenuity and, more importantly, its need for vengeance. The impact of the blast rocked Titan, but the ship didn't falter. It absorbed the energy, holding steady, its massive guns ready to respond. Commander Avatran, standing on the bridge, gripped the control panel with cold precision. She didn't flinch. "Return fire," she commanded, her voice a cold whisper that echoed in the war room. Within seconds, the retaliation was swift and unforgiving. The Titan's weapon systems hummed to life, unleashing a series of devastating pulses that tore through the Rafar ships with surgical precision. The Rafar fleet was caught off guard, their ships disintegrating one after another in a dazzling display of destruction. Human ships followed, their weapons cutting through the darkness like the hands of vengeance itself. But the battle was far from over. The Rafar fleet had made a grave mistake in underestimating the humans. As the last of the first wave of ships was torn apart, they retreated into the void, their pride shattered, their retreat a mix of confusion and fear. They hadn't anticipated the humans' anger, the cold, brutal precision with which they struck. Yet, as the human fleet pressed on, a new threat emerged. From the depths of the enemy formation, the Rafar launched a massive energy weapon, a weapon that was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. It was a colossal beam of destructive power, aimed directly at Titan. Avatran's eyes narrowed as she watched the weapon charging, the sky in front of her warship crackling with energy. This was the Rafar's last gambit. They were throwing everything they had left at them. Titan's shields flared again, brighter this time, as the massive energy beam slammed into them. The entire ship shook, its internal systems groaning under the pressure, but the shields held. Avatran's hands tightened on the controls as she felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about more than revenge. This was humanity's stand, its declaration that it would never bow to the likes of the Rafar again. With the energy weapon absorbed, Avatran gave a swift, commanding nod. Prepare the counterattack. In an instant, Titan unleashed its full power. The fleet followed suit, pressing forward with relentless force. The first wave of Rafar ships that had been left trailing in the wake of their retreat were no match for humanity's fury. They were obliterated in moments, vanishing into the black abyss of space like forgotten whispers. The Rafar, stunned by the overwhelming power of the human retaliation, began to retreat in panic. Their command ships scrambled to escape, their once proud fleets crumbling under the onslaught. Avatran watched the chaos unfold before her. The tide had turned. The Rafar, who had thought they were invincible, now realized they were not only losing, but they were fighting against a force far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Avatran's expression remained cold, but in the pit of her stomach, there was a flicker of something else. Satisfaction? No. It was something darker. Something that felt like the satisfaction of reclaiming what had been taken from her, from all of humanity. Revenge was a dish best served cold, but it came with a price. The war was far from over. The Rafar might retreat for now, but Avatran knew better than to believe it would be that easy. As the remaining Rafar ships disappeared into the dark, the human fleet stood victorious, for the moment. Avatran's voice crackled over the comms, her words carrying the weight of a long-forgotten truth. This is just the beginning. They thought we were weak. But they've only seen the tip of the iceberg. The fleet continued to move forward, heading deeper into Rafar space. Avatran's mind never wavered. She knew that every step forward meant more casualties, more sacrifices. But she also knew that there was no going back. Humanity had drawn a line in the sand, and the Rafar were now learning what happens when you push too far. And as she looked out at the stars, the flicker of a smile crossed her face. It was a dark, grim smile, one that told a story. The Rafar had awakened something in humanity, something dangerous, something that would not rest until justice was served. And on the bridge of the Titan, Avatran couldn't help but chuckle darkly as she watched the galaxy unfold before her. Well, she muttered, at least we'll never have to listen to their nonsense about peace again. The first strike had been made, and humanity had shown the galaxy what it was capable of. But as Avatran watched her fleet move forward, she knew that the hardest battles were still ahead. The Titan, once a forgotten relic buried deep in the cold heart of space, now hummed with life. The gargantuan warship cut through the stars with the weight of inevitability behind it, as if the universe itself was bracing for the impact of what was about to unfold. It had been dormant for eons, its weapons sealed away in silence, its core untouched by the hands of those who had crafted it. But now, it was awake, and humanity's wrath had just found its voice. Commander Avatran stood at the bridge, her eyes locked on the vast expanse of space before her. A soft, yet unyielding pulse reverberated beneath her boots, emanating from the very heart of the Titan. It wasn't just the ship waking up, it was the entire galaxy feeling it. The Rafar fleet, a vast and seemingly invincible armada, had no idea what was coming. They had been arrogant, dismissive, thinking that they could crush the humans beneath their heels, but now, they were about to learn that sometimes the universe makes a mistake. They thought humanity was small. But the Titan, the ship of destruction, was anything but. As Titan's weapon systems began to hum and charge, Avatran gave the order with the calm of someone who had long ago reconciled herself to the violence that was coming. Engage. The word slipped from her lips like a whisper, but to anyone who heard it, it was a command that carried the weight of 1,000 soldiers, 1,000 battles. The very air seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The first salvo from Titan's cannons exploded across the Rafar fleet with terrifying speed. The ships that had once looked like giants now seemed fragile, caught in the unstoppable force of humanity's vengeance. The Rafar flagship, a colossal vessel at the forefront of their forces, erupted in a brilliant flash of light. For a moment, everything was silent, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the end of the Rafar's hubris. Then came the second blow. A massive wave of energy shot from Titan's core, a particle storm cannon, a weapon so powerful that it wasn't just a blast, it was an erasure. Rafar ships didn't explode, they vanished. Entire ships, entire fleets, reduced to nothing but scattered debris and whispers in the dark. The might of Titan was like a storm ripping through the sky, leaving nothing but the broken remnants of the enemy in its wake. Avatran watched the destruction unfold before her, her gaze unflinching. She didn't need to watch the chaos on the screens, she could feel it in her bones, and the heavy thrum of Titan's heartbeat beneath her feet. For all the battles Avatran had fought in, all the strategies she had planned, nothing could compare to this moment. This wasn't a war anymore. It was something more personal. The Rafar hadn't just attacked a colony, they had attacked humanity's very soul. They had killed innocents, torn apart families, and erased lives without a second thought. Now, they would pay for it in a way they never imagined. As the Rafar fleet scrambled to retaliate, their ships firing erratically in a desperate attempt to stave off the inevitable, Avatran felt a strange, bitter satisfaction. They had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the anger of a people who had nothing left to lose. This wasn't a fight for power, for land, or for glory. This was a fight for survival, and it was clear who would come out on top. But even as the Rafar's forces were being obliterated, something gnawed at the edge of Avatran's mind. The Titan's power was overwhelming, yes. But it was also something more, something ancient. The ship had been built for a purpose, to end wars. But what if that purpose had been forgotten? What if the weapon they had awakened was more than just a ship, more than just a tool of war? What if it was something that could destroy everything, including humanity itself? The thought was fleeting, lost in the firestorm of battle. Avatran shook it off. There was no time for doubt, no time for second-guessing. The Rafar had forced humanity's hand, and now they would reap the consequences. The warships surrounding Titan were like toys in the hands of a child compared to the full force of the Titan's firepower. The destruction continued, wave after wave, until the Rafar fleet had been reduced to smoldering wreckage. The message was clear, humanity would not be defeated. With the enemy fleet shattered and the remnants of their forces scattering into the depths of space, Avatran gave the final order, finish it. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the Titan as its particle storm cannon powered up once again. This time, the weapon wasn't aimed at just a fleet, it was aimed at the Rafar homeworld itself. As the cannon discharged, a massive beam of concentrated energy lanced across the void, its intensity so great that it seemed to twist the fabric of space itself. The Rafar homeworld, once a thriving center of power and control, was erased from existence. Not destroyed, not decimated. It was gone, like a shadow that had never been. Avatran watched the destruction unfold in front of her, her face impassive. There was no joy, no elation in the victory. Only the hollow, cold satisfaction of knowing that the war had been won. The Rafar Empire would no longer terrorize the galaxy. Humanity had made sure of it. As Titan drifted through the remains of the Rafar stronghold, Avatran couldn't help but allow herself a single, grim chuckle. "Guess the galaxy won't be laughing at us anymore," she muttered under her breath. And just as the final pieces of the Rafar's empire crumbled into dust, she couldn't help but think, well, at least we won't have to hear their annoying propaganda anymore. The battle-worn fleet drifted through the cold, silent reaches of space, its victory still echoing in the wake of the Rafar's shattered empire. But just as the humans dared to breathe, to think that perhaps the galaxy would finally be safe from the weight of endless war, a cold voice cut through the silence. Titan's AI, usually calm and steady, spoke with an urgency that no one had ever heard before. "The Umbra have awoken," it said. "And they are not just conquerors. They erase civilizations." For a brief moment, the universe itself seemed to stop. A chilling dread spread across the fleet, and even the hardened soldiers aboard Titan found themselves frozen by the gravity of the warning. The Rafar had been cruel. They had been relentless. But now the humans were faced with something worse, a force not driven by greed or conquest, but by something far older, darker. A force that could wipe entire histories from existence as if they had never been written. The Umbra. A name whispered only in fear, a name that had once been dismissed as a myth, an ancient tale meant to scare children in the quiet dark of their homes. But now that myth had been given a face, and that face was coming for humanity. The command deck of Titan buzzed with activity. Officers scrambled, the AI systems hummed with information, and Commander Avatran stood at the center of it all, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel the weight of the decision coming. The Umbra weren't just a new enemy, they were an existential threat. The very fabric of the universe was about to be tested again, and this time, there was no telling who would survive. The AI continued, its voice heavy with warning. The Rafar were merely pawns. The Umbra do not conquer. They erase. They don't care for territory. They consume everything. Avatran's mind raced. For years, humanity had lived in the shadow of the Rafar, building fleets, preparing for war. But nothing, no plan, no strategy could have prepared them for this. The Umbra were something beyond war. They were the darkness before time, the void that devours stars and civilizations alike. Their power was not just in their weapons but in their ability to erase history itself. As Titan moved deeper into space, preparing for the inevitable, the galaxy itself seemed to buckle under the pressure. The Black Nebula, once a place of mystery and myth, began to pulse with unnatural light. It was as though the very edges of reality were stretching, reaching out to meet the nightmare that had been hiding within. And then, they appeared. The Umbra fleet emerged from the nebula like a shadow falling over the stars, vast, silent, and terrifying. Ships made not of metal, but of living darkness, shifting and reshaping as if they were creatures of nightmare. The moment they entered the solar system, all light seemed to dim, as if the stars themselves knew what was coming. The ships moved with a predatory grace, as if they had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the galaxy to show weakness. The human fleet, battered but unbroken, steeled itself. The war that had begun as a fight for vengeance had now turned into a struggle for survival. Titan, with its ancient power and formidable weapons, stood as humanity's last line of defense. But even Titan's mighty guns seemed insignificant against the overwhelming darkness of the Umbra. Avatran's voice cut through the tension, calm but resolute. Prepare for battle. We fight because there is no choice. For every man, woman, and child on Earth, for every soul that has ever lived under this sky, we fight. Titan's cannons powered up, its shields flickering to life as the first wave of Umbra ships closed in. The eerie silence of the nebula was broken by the explosive crackle of energy as the two forces collided. The Umbra struck first, cloaked in shadows, they launched waves of energy blasts that tore through space with the raw power of a black hole. The first ships to intercept were destroyed in seconds, vaporized by the overwhelming force. But Titan wasn't so easily crushed. Its weapons fired back, a blaze of light in the eternal dark. The energy beams ripped through the Umbra ships, but with each blast, the creatures only seemed to multiply, morphing into larger, more menacing shapes. They did not retreat. They did not flee. They simply absorbed the damage and pressed on, as if the very idea of destruction was alien to them. Avatran watched the chaos unfold, her mind racing. The human fleet was holding, but barely. She could see the terror in her crew's eyes as they fought back the impossible odds. But there was no time for fear. The Umbra were here, and they were not leaving. The question wasn't whether humanity would win, it was whether they could survive long enough to understand their enemy. Focus fire on the largest Umbra ship, Avatran ordered, her voice cold with determination. Target their core. Let's see if they bleed. Titan unleashed a devastating barrage. The Umbra ship that had been leading the charge shattered into thousands of pieces, each fragment vanishing into the cold emptiness of space. For a brief, fleeting moment, it seemed as though the humans might have a chance. But as the debris scattered, the darkness that had once been the Umbra began to reform, to coalesce into something far larger, far more terrifying. And then, in the heart of that darkness, something shifted. A flicker of recognition. The AI aboard Titan paused, scanning the data coming in. The Umbra, they are not just attacking. They are adapting. Adapting? Avatran whispered, eyes narrowing. The words hit her like a cold slap. The Umbra didn't just destroy, they evolved. And now, humanity's best weapon might not be enough to stop them. Titan systems screamed in alarm as the Umbra began to swarm, their shapes becoming more and more difficult to track, bending light and reality itself. The fight had just become something else entirely. But through it all, as humanity's fate hung in the balance, Commander Avatran found a strange sense of grim humor. Well, she muttered under her breath, staring into the swirling mass of Umbra ships. At least the universe is finally getting interesting. Here I thought I was going to have a quiet retirement. And with that, the war had just taken on a whole new, terrifying chapter. The stars were quieter now, the once chaotic hum of battle fading into the cold silence of space. The Umbra, a race of living shadows, had long been the terror of the galaxy. Their ships, dark and formless, warped the very fabric of space itself. No one had ever thought that anything could stop them. Until now. Titan, humanity's last weapon, had awakened in the darkest of times. Its massive form moved through space like a living god, its weapons unleashing hell with precision and ferocity. With each passing moment, Titan became more than just a warship. It was a symbol of humanity's indomitable spirit, of defiance and revenge. Commander Avatran stood on the bridge, her eyes locked on the dark horizon where the Umbra fleet loomed, threatening to devour the galaxy. The Umbra had attacked without warning, their shadowy ships emerging from the black nebula, unleashing a storm of energy that shattered the calm. But they had underestimated humanity. They had underestimated the power of Titan. The battle had been relentless. The Umbra had come in waves, their ships reshaping the very nature of space around them. But humanity wasn't the prey anymore. No, humanity was the predator. Titan had proven that. The massive warship absorbed the Umbra's blows as if they were nothing more than raindrops, and then returned fire with devastating accuracy, erasing enemy ships with single shots. Every blast from Titan's particle storm cannon sent ripples through space, a testament to the raw power humanity had unleashed. The Umbra leader, once thought invincible, was now a mere speck in the void, erased from existence in one final, thunderous explosion. The remaining Umbra ships, scattered and disorganized, tried to retreat, but they had already lost. They were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy. The humans had proven their worth. Titan's hull, battered but intact, turned back toward Earth. The war was over. The Umbra had been defeated, and with it, humanity had taken its place at the top of the food chain. It had been a brutal and costly victory, but it was one humanity could hold on to. The galaxy would now know, you don't mess with Earth. The crew on board Titan, though battered and bruised, stood tall. Their victory was not just against the Umbra, but against the very idea that humanity was weak, that they would remain silent in the dark corners of space. They had fought for their right to exist. And they had won. Commander Avatran looked over at her crew, their faces a mix of exhaustion, relief, and something else. Pride. They had survived the impossible. They had faced down a threat that had wiped out entire civilizations, and they had emerged victorious. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady, but laced with the weight of everything they had endured. Humanity stands, she said quietly, her words carrying the weight of their collective triumph. And we will never fall again. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. No one spoke, but they didn't need to. They had made their statement. The galaxy would remember this day. The Umbra had learned the hard way that humanity was not to be underestimated. No more. As the fleet made its way back to Earth, the crew knew that things would never be the same. They had been tested, pushed to the edge of extinction, and they had come through. They were scarred, but stronger. The galaxy was vast, and they had only just begun to scratch the surface. But one thing was certain, they had shown the universe that humanity would never again be the prey. And in the quiet moments between the stars, as the ship sailed through the vast emptiness, Commander Avatran couldn't help but think of the irony. The Umbra, creatures of darkness and terror, had been brought low by something they never saw coming, the relentless will of the human spirit. Well, she muttered, a grim smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Guess they won't be laughing now. And with that, the fleet continued its journey home, humanity's victory echoing through the stars, a tale of survival, defiance, and the ultimate reckoning. As the final battle rages, Titan and the human fleet stand at the precipice. Victory is within reach, but at what cost? The galaxy has seen humanity rise from the ashes, but is that enough to ensure our survival against an enemy even worse than the Rafar? Titan's final strike, the absolute destruction of the Umbra, is the key, or is it? The silence of the stars tells only one truth: this isn't over. This is just the beginning of a new war, a war against the unknown. So, what's next for humanity? What happens when the greatest weapon in history finally awakens? Leave your theories in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like button if you want more stories like this. Subscribe to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story for the next chapter in this epic journey. This is just the beginning, my friends. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.